Hello, everybody, and welcome to this amazing video series that I'm going to do with my friend and colleague, Benoit. And Benoit Roger comes from France, and he has a PhD in natural product chemistry from France. So first of all, a big welcome. And my
Thank
first
you.
question here is, can you explain a little bit to us what natural product chemistry really is? What in short, because I'm sure you can
In short,
for an hour.
so first, thank you very much for this invitation. Just in a few words, natural product chemistry is the study of the chemical components of plants. What do they contain and how they are produced in the plant, and eventually the impact of the environment on the plant chemistry. Yeah,
So,
in a few words.
So in a few words, anybody using DropSmart would like to have your brain.
Oh.
or bits of it. And then after that, you went for a postdoc in Canada, and that's where you met Phytochemia. That's how I met you.
Yeah.
So do you want to say a little bit about that? How did you meet, and what it is that attracted you to them? What it is that they do? Because people probably don't know.
Phytochemia is a very young team of passionate people working on plant chemistry. So when I arrived in Canada for my postdoc, they were starting a lab for all the essential oil and plant extract analysis. Well, we really worked in the same field, and we had a very good relationship. So after my postdoc, I went to work with them, both in the lab, and also I had a project to develop my own company project, meaning to develop some little stills. So I developed this company with them, which is Alchemia Solutions.
So here I'd like to point out that Benoit is very modest about his work. That was my next question. He developed amazing stills. So you are not only a chemist, you have this technical mind to you as well. You're developing stills that are different, a little bit different than traditional ones.
Oh yes, it's yes, they are quite modern. I'm not. This is because actually I always worked from the beginning, and before my PhD, I always worked in a industrial environment. So between the lab and the university, of course, but between the lab and the production. So for 15 years, I'm working with the big stills, smaller stills, extraction, transformation. So yes, I'm pretty used to work with this equipment.
So this is how I thought you would be one of the best people to ask about these questions. A lot of our audience, some haven't even seen a still, but definitely not a GC machine. How does that work? What is that? I see a lot of people are even scared to look at those numbers, and pages that we get. So what Benoit and I wanted to do is demystify that and bring it closer to everybody, because we feel it is important that people use the analysis, right? But how do you even approach it? What that even is? So Benoit was very generous to and be willing to explain this step by step. And I hope everybody will be enjoying this. I noticed that a lot of us are in the same boat. So a lot of us have the same questions. I had to go through that. I like the essential oils, and then I went backwards all the way to the still. So I resonate with these people when they see the final report you guys are creating, and just feel overwhelmed. So thank you so much for willing to do this. I think a lot of us
You're
will
welcome.
agree. So take it away. Go ahead, do your magic.
Okay, so I will just share my screen in a few seconds. So first of all, I won't obviously present all this course. This is a course I developed with the College of Team of Aromatherapy. The essence of Team College of Holistic Studies, sorry. So I have developed several courses, and I will just use one which is about GC to just explain in a few minutes how it works. And I believe we will do another video on how we can read the GC. So first of all, I will explain how it works, how we do analyze an essential oil. And after that, we will see when we have a report, how can we conclude, which is actually the more important, because the listing is fine, it's important, but if we cannot conclude, we have just half the way done.
So let me just clarify here for anybody that didn't get that. Benoit is working with a College of Holistic Study, the Essence team, a time, and what we are getting is a quick glimpse of their course. So this is really big and really generous what he's offering, and we will also, after we go through what the basic, I guess, flow of getting the GC is, we will do another video telling you what to do with it. So we're very excited and grateful.
So first, well, what is chromatography? Well, this is not on this picture. Just a few words about chromatography. Chromatography was invented by a Russian botanist at the beginning of the 20th century. He worked on the plant pigment, and he developed a method to separate the pigment of the plant. So this is what chromatography means. It means writing with color. So now we also use chromatography for a lot of different techniques which have the same purpose, which is separate the molecules. But initially, it was developed to separate the pigments of the plant.
Oh, beautiful!
I could, if maybe, show you what. So this was this Russian botanist, and when I tell you that it was about separating the pigment of the plant, his technique looked like this. Obviously, I was not able to get picture of one and colorful picture of 1 century ago, but he probably got something like this here. So, and after that, chromatography evolved in different ways, and we kept the name even if we don't actually work on pigments. Here it's liquid chromatography, but what we use in essential oil analysis is gas chromatography. So this
so the GC means
GC
gas.
means gas chromatography. We don't separate pigments with liquid, etc. We separate the volatile constituent with another technique, but it's still the same purpose. It's to separate the compounds. So how does it work? So again, the purpose of the GC analysis is to separate as many volatile constituents as possible. Not just for fun, but to identify them and to quantify them.
I have a lot of friends who find that very fun.
Yeah, we do also. So how does it work? This is a very
I'm
simplified.
sorry to stop you here.
No,
Just
no.
if you go back, can you go a step back? This is how it looks like, people.
Oh,
This
yes.
is something I was curious about for many years until I actually saw it in the lab, and I was like, oh, that's all. I thought it was huge. I don't know what I thought. I
Well,
just
it's
didn't
not
expect
small.
this.
You have the size of a screen here. It's not small, but it's a big cube.
So
And
this is what it looks like once you enter a lab. This is where you separate the molecules of,
yeah,
for us,
yeah,
what's
exactly.
interesting, essential oils. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So the principle is represented here. The GC you see here, it's the box here, contains what we call a column. So this curved line here is actually a column, a very, very long and thin tube. Okay, and this column is inside a oven, which can be programmed. Okay, this column at the beginning is connected to a gas container. Okay, so usually we have, for example, helium, and constantly we have helium that flows into the column constantly, even if it's not working. So
can I have a question here?
yeah, of course.
So when you put helium into the oven, you said a word for oven, which I think it means that you're monitoring the temperature. Is that what it, that's what you,
yeah.
So just if I got it correctly, I'm guessing other people are also wondering what that.
Yes, usually, well, it's always the same. At the very beginning of the method, the oven is pretty cold, and during the method, the temperature will rise. Okay, but constantly we have some gas which runs into the column, so from the injector to the detector. So at the very beginning of a GC analysis, we will inject a sample here in what we call the inlet. And this inlet is heated at a pretty high temperature, and all the volatile constituent will arrive at the very beginning of the column, the long tube, okay? But at the very beginning of the method, the oven is pretty cold. So all the volatile constituent will condensate. They will stay at the beginning of the method, even if we have some gas flowing into the column. But as I told you, we have an oven which is, we can program it, and the temperature will rise during the analysis. So let's just take a very simple example.
So before you do, I have many questions. So here where you say sample injector, that means that this is where we put our essential oil or whatever it is that you're going to now separate, right?
Yeah.
So I know you are a man of a practical person, so for you that's normal. But just for everybody to have an idea, how much of the essential oil do you need to do an analysis? How much do you put there in the sample injector? And then,
well, we have some, well,
it.
actually, I will show you, because here it's just the principle, but I will show you some real picture of the parts of, so here it really just for the principle. But to answer the question, we have here some vials of 1 milliliters, and but actually we inject like 5 microliters. We inject a tiny amount of essential oil. So even if we have just a drop, we can do an analysis.
Oh, here I have another question. I'm full of questions. I know you have to do it twice, right? You have to calibrate it, if I understand correctly. So you would.
we have a calibration, but not for each injection. We have a calibration each week, for example, but not at each injection.
Okay, thank you.
So to explain the principle, let's just take an example with two very simple molecules, ethanol and water. Ethanol boils at around 80 degrees and water at 100 degrees. So what happens if we inject a mixture of ethanol and water in the GC? So first we will inject heat here, and here again it's heated at a pretty high temperature. So everything that can be volatilized will reach the beginning of the column, but again at the beginning of the method, the temperature of the oven is pretty cold. So both ethanol and water will condensate at the beginning of the column. Then during the method, the temperature will rise, and at a certain point, it will reach the boiling point of ethanol. So at this point, ethanol won't be able to stay at the beginning of the column, and it will start its journey into the column pushed by the carrier gas. Again, the carrier gas pushes constantly, it flows constantly through the column. So when
it picks up any molecule that evaporates, and it picks it up and it pushes it again. And it just so happened that this one was first, not water.
Yeah, ethanol volatilizes first, so it will begin to travel through the column first. So when the oven is at around 80 degrees, ethanol will start to move forward into the column and reach the detector. But at 80, we are, well, for the boiling point, it's not the time yet. It's still liquid. So it will have to wait a few minutes more to start the same journey as ethanol. And at the end, we have separated two compounds because they have two different boiling points. It's and obviously they reach the detector, and we have a signal for each individual component. I will show you what it gives a bit less simplified than there's two peaks here. So here is how it works. We separate a mixture of compounds. Of course, here it's a super simple example, but we can separate a mixture of 100 compounds using this method. It's simplified. We have some interaction in the column, but the principle is here.
So just to summarize this part, as essential oils are a mixture of different compounds, and each of these compounds is has a different boiling point. This is a very simple way to separate them, and then you see what is in the essential oil.
Yeah. For example, if your essential oil is composed of monoterpene and sesquiterpenes, well, monoterpenes are more volatile. They are smaller molecules, so they will evaporate faster at a lower temperature than the sesquiterpene, and then they will reach the detector before the sesquiterpene.
Excellent. I think now we all understand that, finally.
Great.
Thank you.
So here is what we get at the end. We have
this is what we're all scared of. It looks like a heartbeat or something like that.
But don't be scared, because I will show you here. It's just an image, but I have a software I will be able to open, and we will just play with a chromatogram. So at the end of the analysis, we have what we call a chromatogram, which is a representation of the separation. So we have here the time, and here the intensity of the signal. And each peak you see here corresponds to at least one molecule. Why do I say at least? Because sometimes we have two different molecules which have the same boiling point and they reach the detector at the same time. So just to be clear, here you can see, for example, you have 25 minutes and here you have 5 minutes. So the compounds on the left of the chromatogram and typically at the beginning of the report are the more volatile because they reach the detector and they were able to travel through the column and arrive at the detector in 5 minutes. And this one needed much more time. So it means they are less volatile.
It's a heavier molecule or bigger one, a sesqui something.
Yeah. Typically, the example I just gave about monoterpene and sesquiterpene, at the beginning, you have the monoterpenes, and at the end, you have the sesquiterpenes. And if you have D-terpenes, you will find them even after.
So just while you're doing that, oh, great, you have that. No, you can go ahead. I just wanted to clarify for people who don't know what we're talking, mono, sesqui, diterpene. That just defines how many carbons it has in the molecule, how big the molecule is, how heavy it is, and that's how you separate them. It's nothing too fancy. It's just like a name.
Yeah, when you have small molecules, they evaporate pretty easily. They are smaller, so they evaporate easily. And when they are bigger, you have to eat more to evaporate them.
It's logical.
So typically, GC is a perfect tool when it comes to separate small and non-polar molecule. Maybe I won't go too deep in what is polarity. It may be another video, but typically the compounds you find in essential oil are they are the perfect candidate for the separation with GC. We can also separate bigger molecule by eating more or with some transformation, but we won't go there in this.
No, but I would just like to add here something I didn't know for at my beginnings, is because GC is always mentioned with essential oils, but you do it with carrier oils as well. I would like to see that more in practice. You can do this.
Yeah, and you probably noticed here we have fatty acid methyl ester. So typically when we analyze vegetal oil, we break the triglyceride into smaller molecules, and if they are smaller, we can analyze them by GC. But the triglyceride itself, it's too big. But when we break it in 4 different parts, we have the glycerol and 3 fatty acids, we can analyze the composition of the fatty acid. So yes, at the end, we have a small transformation and we can still use a GC for to analyze an oil, and we can even do this with sugars. Actually, it's beyond. I mean, we don't have sugars in essential oil, but we can analyze sugars from plants with GC. It just requires transformation.
Yeah. I just want to get across to everybody that chemistry is a lot of fun. You guys are just having fun with all of these machines.
Yeah. And also, we can also find in plants. This is, for example, a triterpene. So it's the same family as the monoterpenes, like limonene, for example, we find in citrus, and sesquiterpenes. It's the same family, but just bigger. This kind of compound does not evaporate. We don't find them in essential oil, but they are pretty tough. They can stand a pretty high temperature, so we can still analyze them by GC. And for example, we find this compound at a pretty high percentage in absolute, for example. You know, the absolute are the extract we mainly use in perfumery. We find a lot of these compounds.
Great.
So here are the compounds we can easily analyze by GC. Some compounds we can analyze by GC. We have to eat a bit more or transform them a bit, but we cannot analyze all the compound by GC. If they cannot stand high temperature, they will degrade in the GC. So we just won't see them at the end. And also when we have big and polar molecule, we just can't, they do not separate at all.
That's
so
just a no.
We cannot, yeah. So GC is perfect for essential oil because they are supposed to contain only volatile constituents. But if we have something which is not volatile, it's possible that we don't see it by GC. Mm-hmm. And maybe we will talk about this in the second video.
About adulation and adding things to the essential oils.
Yeah. For example, if you just add vegetable oil in an essential oil, if we don't do any transformation, it's possible that we just don't see it by GC. We have to perform another kind of analysis.
Oh, I have so many questions here, but I will not go into. Yeah, well, I'm curious. Maybe we can talk about it later. Like, what about when you have macerated oils? Then you have both. We have such interesting molecules because it's with the fatty oil, with the vegetable oils plus the things that come from the plant. So I'm very curious about that, but maybe another time again.
Yeah, it's we actually have to separate the compounds from the vegetable oils and the volatile constituent.
So you do like.
Well, we have some lab techniques to separate everything.
That's my next mission, to try and get those into drops for it to see how that looks. It's really cool.
So
go ahead.
Just a few pictures. I won't go in details, but just to show you how it works. Here you have the autosampler of the GC. What you see here is the actual vials we put the essential oil in. You have another kind of, this is just the tower. We have a syringe here. It will just take 1, 2, or 5 microliters of essential oil and inject the right amount of essential oil in what we call the injector. In the previous diagram, I told you that we have a part which volatilizes everything. Well, this is this part. When we inject an essential oil, it will, this is heated at a pretty high temperature. So all the volatile constituent will evaporate and go into the column.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
This is the oven. Here we have 2 columns. Again, I won't go into this in this short video. And we have a zoom here just to prove that, this is the GC column. It's really a tube. It's just 30 or 60 meters long, and it's very, very thin. We cannot see it at bare eyes. We have to,
become a molecule to see it.
Yeah. So basically, the carrier gas helium travels into this tube, and it will take with him all the volatile molecule.
It's like a train.
Yeah. And finally, we have the detectors. Here I will just say a few points because there are a lot of confusion. For example, all the people talk about GC-MS, but actually here I talk about GC, but MS is just one detector, and pretty often we don't use the MS detector, we use another detector, which is the FID. So this is a picture of the FID.
So do you want to just say what at the MS stands for and FID stands for?
This is just what I will explain now.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I will skip a few parts because So we have two main detectors. At the end of the column, we have to detect the compounds that have been separated. We have the MS, so GC-MS, and we have the FID, GC-FID. The first one is used when we have to get an identification of a compound we don't know. If we have an unknown compound, it's a very convenient tool because it will help us to identify it. But for the quantification, we have to use a GC-FID. And actually, this is something, we have a standard for the essential analysis. This standard, this ISO standard, says that we have to use a GC-FID for the final report because the percentage of each individual compound it gives is more accurate. It corresponds a bit more to the reality than what we could get with a GC-MS. I'm not sure it's a subtlety, but we have to use both. One for the quantification and the MS for some identifications.
So can I ask you here, when did this happen and why does nobody know about FID? Everybody's talking about GC-MS. Is this something that's been around for a while or is it a standard that came recently? Maybe that's why.
No, actually, this is the first, this is very, I don't know when all these two techniques were invented, but I would guess this came before the MS. I suppose because GC-MS gives more information about identification. It's a more expensive tool. I don't know why everybody talks about GC-MS, but in fact, we use FID and MS just when we need. I don't know, honestly, why everybody talks about GC-MS.
Great, that is excellent to clarify. So most of those reports we see is just GC without the MS.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, some lab use the only GC-MS, but again, we have an ISO standards saying that we should use the GC-FID for the quantification. So if we want to do it correctly, we have to follow the standards.
Of course.
Well, it doesn't mean the result of quantification coming from the MS are completely bad, but it has been demonstrated that it's a bit less close to the reality than what we obtain with GC-FID. Okay, so we follow this rule. So basically, how does it work, a GC-MS? Well, first, we use it again when we have a doubt about one compound, because we can work only with GC-FID. We will analyze the retention time of the molecule. So we know, for example, that linalool in the lavender is supposed to get out of the system at this exact time here. So
when you say retention time, that actually just means what time did it come to the detector?
Yeah. And actually, again, it goes a bit too far for this video, but we don't use the retention time, but we use the retention index. So so when we analyze a GC, an essential oil by GC-FID, most of the time we can identify about all the molecule, but sometimes we see a molecule which is not supposed to be here. So in this case, we will inject it in GCMS to try to get an identification. So how does it work? Basically, again, I won't go into very fine details, but the MS will break a molecule in different parts. And a molecule with in given condition will always break the same way. It will just break at the weak points. And the detector will collect and show the mass of the fragment and their abundance. So what we get at the end is like a fingerprint. A molecule breaks always the same way, and it always gives the same mass spectrum. So we have a mass spectrum we can compare to a database, and it's with this comparison we will know if it's one compound or another.
So
I know this is
once you have
bit...
the time when it comes and the mass spectrum and all of these details, then you can put it together and finally know what it's about.
Well, actually, this is my point now. Well, I will skip all these parts again. If you want to go deeper, this course will be given with a team college. So basically, the GCMS will give you what you have here. Here you have two mass spectrum, one in red and one in blue. So the GCMS will give us mass spectrum, and we will compare this mass spectrum to a database. But the thing is that the GCMS does not identify. I mean, it will just give us correspondence between what you have, what you, I mean, the compound we wanted to identify because it was not supposed to be here, it gave this mass spectrum. So the GCMS will just give us a correspondence between this mass spectrum, the one you got from the compound you want to identify, with all the compounds in the database. It will, for example, tell you that your compound has 98% of similarity with this compound in the database. But in itself, it's not an identification. It just tells you you have a good correspondence. Your compound looks like one in the database. But the problem, well, it's just the way it works, is that some compounds which are very close can have a nearly identical mass spectrum. They have almost the same fingerprint. For example, here you have two sesquiterpenes, and they give there's two mass spectrum which are very close. So in itself, it won't identify. We have also to check in GCFID what is the retention time, because it's very unlikely that these two compounds have the exact same mass spectrum and the same retention time. So we use these two informations.
Just again, retention time means the time that it came out and came to the detector, just because we don't use those words. So if somebody forgot in between. So great. So then that's why you need both to put the pieces together, because this might be too similar, or they might come out at the same time. But when you have both, then you can make out those compounds that are tricky.
Yeah,
See if I
but
can-
again, we just use it when we have some doubts, because
Mm.
I mean, when we analyze lavender, we have analyzed a ton of lavender I mean, I don't know how many hundreds, but a lot. So we know what we are supposed to find. And at a certain point, we just don't need the GCMS unless we find a compound which is not supposed to be here. So just with the retention time, pretty often we can just have the analysis, and sometimes we have to use the GCMS. Just to show you the difference, we have a GCMS here. So the GC is here and the MS is here. And when we use a GC FID, we have the same MS here, but the FID detector is pretty small, so it's just on the top of the GC.
Great, thank you.
And the way it works, it's pretty simple. All the compounds that come from the column are burnt, and the combustion products are detected with well, this system. Again, I won't enter in too much details. I will skip. So as a summary, we always use both of them, the GCMS and the GCFID. They are very complementary. I will skip a few parts.
Of course, and here I'll mention again, if you're interested in more, Benoit has his own lectures, as well as working with the college that he's sharing from Essence of Time. So if you want to go deeper, you can go and check that out there.
Yeah.
We will put the link so you can go and get informed. And we are grateful for you to share this amazing info with us, because we all have same questions, some of us for years or decades. So thank you. Yeah, it's
Here
true,
is
because there are not really books about it that are easy to come across in the aromatherapy community. So this is really, really precious.
Yeah. Well, I explained the process pretty fast. I explained how the GC work. So I explained a bit how we can identify a molecule with the GCMS. For the GC feed FID, we have a database. All the lab build their own database for the retention time. So basically, the GC FID database is a database where we enter the information of the retention index or retention time of each individual compound we find in essential oil. For example, we know that our system, limonene, is supposed to reach the detector at 4.7 minutes. And we know that beta-ocimene is supposed to reach the detector at 4 minutes 88. So this is just our database, and this is what we use to identify all the peaks we have in GCFID.
So this is great that you mentioned that, because I think a lot of people think that getting an analysis, it's the same from every laboratory, but you have this just for your machine. You know that this is when it's supposed to come, because somebody else might have another one and it has different numbers. Is that correct?
Well, actually, and this is why we use, I didn't want to go into such detail because it would take probably much more time, and it's not easy to understand how we calculate it. But basically, this is why we use retention index, because obviously, if we change the method, the retention time will change. If we just go back at the example of ethanol and water, if the temperature rise very fast, the ethanol will reach the detector pretty fast. And if the temperature rise a bit more slowly, it will also take more time to evaporate and reach the detector. So the retention time depends on the method.
So when you say method, in this case, it's the temperature of the oven.
The way it's programmed, and even all the parameters beside the gas flow,
everything.
Everything. But yeah, mainly the programmation of temperature and gas flow. Depending on the method, we can have for one compound different retention time. So what we do is that we calculate a retention index in comparison with some other compounds. And we use alkanes for that. Again, maybe it's going too far.
Yes, we will
if you want more information. But what we do is that we inject some standards and we check where our compounds get out of the column compared to the standards. So if we change the method, of course, the compounds we want to analyze will, their retention time will move, but the retention time of the standards will also move. So they will keep the same retention index.
And this is why you do it once a week. You said you do the
yes, regularly. Actually, it's just when we need it. When we see that the retention index start to move, we can make another calibration. So this is why you can find different retention time from the same product from different lab, but one compound analyzed on one given column, because here the column has an influence, it should have roughly the same retention index between two labs. And actually, this is why we use retention index, because otherwise we would not be able to compare the data from different labs and publish them, etc.
Excellent. This, I think, this is really helpful for us because people, I think, get confused when they see different numbers and they think it always needs to be but it's many things to take into account. And one of that is the calibration. And like you said, what method is the lab using? So this is something I think that a lot of people get confused with. And I think we are helping them to be less afraid of these differences. So thank you so much.
So here it is. We have a database with the retention index of every possible compound we see in essential oil. It takes years to build such a database, but this is our work. And so we have a chromatogram. We can identify all the peaks. And also, we can have the percentages. The percentages of each individual compound is linked to the intensity of the signal. Obviously, just a simple example, if you have one peak of limonene and one peak of linalool, for example, if they both have the same, not the same height, but the same area under the peak, it means that they represent 50% each of the mixture.
So if I understand correctly, if we're talking about peaks, so when they come out, they make a little peak. So it's more important how thick it is at the bottom than how high it is?
Initially, decades ago, we worked with the 8 because it was much easier to calculate the 8.
The height.
But the height, yes. But now we work with the area under the peak.
Because of course, if it goes high, it takes longer to come back, and then this area identifies that, right?
Yeah,
so
and
it's just a different way of calculating if you're going higher.
Yeah, Well, it's done now. It's done easily with computers. So, and if you have peaks at the very beginning of the method, they are usually sharper. So they have a certain height, but the area under the peak is sometimes pretty low. And at the end of the chromatogram, where we have wider peaks. So for the same height, actually, we have much more a much higher concentration because the area under the peak is higher.
Great, excellent. That helps a lot because we just see those peaks and we don't know what is going on there.
Yeah, it's at least one molecule, and actually I can show it to you just now.
Great.
Here,
so all
example,
of these GCMSs you are sharing are from Phytochemia. It's where you work and you analyze all of these.
Yeah, and
oils.
Obviously it's not a chromatogram from clients. It's our own test, etc. So, for example, this is a chromatogram, and every peaks you see here is a molecule. So we have big molecules that represent a pretty high percentage of the essential oil, and we have all the peaks that are just traces. Okay.
Great.
Excellent. And just as an example, I told you that sometimes we had peaks that elevate at the same time. This is an example. We see that here we have a peak, but we can imagine that actually we have two peaks. They are almost well, they get out of the system very close. So
they merge
here,
kind of. You see
yes,
that they're merging at that point because when this one was going down, this one was already at that height, and then they create.
And here we talk about coelution. They get out of the system at the same time.
So this is where you would use the MS to identify, unless you know.
Well, here we can still know that we have a compound at a certain elution time, and we have another compound just after. So sometimes we don't even need the GCMS to identify them. So sometimes we do. But what is a bit more difficult in this case is to have an accurate we cannot easily give an accurate percentage of each because they are merged. So if this represent 2%, well, maybe this one represent 1.5% and this one 0.5, but it's not easy to give a very accurate percentage. We have techniques. Again, I won't go.
No, of course not. This is already amazing because most of us didn't ever see this, at least not in how you see it. You know, we would see it in the print and it would be tiny, but this is excellent. We can zoom in and see how the peaks come together, and it's like Disneyland for us geeks.
Disneyland.
Yeah, we never get to see this, you know. You play with it every day, we don't.
Yeah, and as you can see, if you zoom, you find more and more and more and more compounds.
See, so this is fun.
Usually we stop at 0.05% because at a certain point it requires 2 hours of work for some traces which are even more difficult to identify. So
okay, so let's emphasize that for everybody out there, because everybody wants to know to the last percentage. So you say that you stop usually at 0.5% because it will take you 2 hours to identify something that.
Well, 2 hours, it's just an example, but yes, the 90% of an essential is analyzed in a few minutes, and the 99% of an essential oil takes, I don't know, 1 hour. But if
you mean the 1%?
Well, if in this example, if we want to know the 10 major compounds, it takes a few minutes.
Mhm.
Now, if we want to identify all of them, it will take 1 hour.
Mhm.
And if we want to identify all of these tiny peaks, it will take 5 hours.
Okay, great. That is great
So
piece of information.
at a certain point, we have to decide where we stop. Otherwise, we would take too much time, and it would cost also
So you
much
can
more.
discuss this with a client, for example, because if somebody
No,
out there is watching who is distilling
we,
essential oils, they
we
might want
could,
a
but
more detailed report.
it's not really the way we work. We try to do the most we can in a reasonable time, and so we usually go. It depends on the oil, but we usually try to reach the peaks which represent 0.05%. Sometimes it's not possible because the chromatogram are extremely complex, and sometimes it's pretty easy. It really depends on the oil. But anyway,
sorry, go finish.
But anyway, when we have to check some specific traces because they are important for the analysis, we check them even if they are lower than 0.05%.
So an average oil, so let's say the majority of the oils that you analyze and that are for sale, then what is the percentage? It's anywhere between, is it from 70 to I don't know, 90%, or is it like 90 to 95? Yes.
Well, it depends really a lot.
Essential
of the oils.
oil, not the absolute.
Yeah, but even essential oil, I mean, if we analyze lavender, we will identify, well, I don't even know the precise average, but it should be around 99.5% of the oil. But if you analyze a vetiver or a very rare product, it will be much below. For some essential oil, we identify, I don't know, 80%.
That is great information. We have in DropSmart a lot times of questions. Why is there so much other, especially with vetiver, for example? So it's for that reason. You have to decide how much time, right? And the time is money. And then it's just that it takes so much more to identify the, it's not a bad analysis. It's just that it's, you have less information to work with. You can't do it as fast, if I understand correctly.
Also, at a given point, I mean, yes, you can have a tiny compound which represents 0.05%, which has a significant smell, but at a certain point, well, it's not impossible, but it's important for the activity of the oil, but well, reasonably, if a compound represents 0.001% of the oil, again, it may be important for the smell of the oil, but for the physiological, biological activity of the oil, reasonably, it's probably less important than a compound which represents 10%.
Okay, so this is great because this is another question a lot of people have, and I'll remind that they have a PhD in natural product chemistry. So what you're saying is valid. So what you're saying is, of course, these little percentages make up the smell of the oil and the whole experience of it. But for the
which is important.
Clinical application, when we want to heal, for example, if it's less than a certain percentage, in your opinion, it is not, it's not, I don't know if I want to say that big of a deal, but is that what you're saying?
Yes, more or less. But again, you can always find some example where a very specific compound at trust level may be important for a special application. Why not? But globally, if you have a tiny amount of a constituent, generally it will not greatly impact the activity of the. Just for example, we have some dangerous compounds in essential oil. For example, in a lot of essential oil, we have toluene, especially some resin, etc. Toluene is a pretty dangerous product, but it's only present at very low level, like 0.01%. Does it make in itself the oil dangerous? I think it does not.
It hasn't shown
because
that
we have below a certain level of a toxic constituent, we know that the risk is pretty low. So it should, for me, in my understanding, again, you can always discuss this point, obviously, and maybe find some example that would say the contrary. But yeah, if you have a compound which is very low, if it's toxic.
What is the very low? I'm pushing now. I'm sorry. I'm putting
very low.
What would it be the number for you?
There is no film limit. I mean, when you, for me, one compound which represents 0.05%, it's low. It's pretty low.
Okay, so that would be something that you consider low, something between 0.05%. Okay, this is really important for us because we are the people who then take this information and use it. And these are the questions that come up a lot. So what is the point where I stop looking at the numbers, you know?
But again,
often in dropsman.
It also depends on the activity and the toxicity of a compound. For example,
and if interaction, right? And
yeah. For example, if you have cyanure in essential oil, for example, from the seed of bitter almond, from bitter almond, you could get a certain amount of hydrogen cyanide. If it's very dangerous, so you must have a very, very low limit. You must be below a super low limit because it's super toxic.
Yes, of course. You're going to be super safe.
If you want to be safe. But if your compound is not super active or super toxic, the limit is not the same. You see what I mean?
Great. Yes, I do. So for example, we are familiar with 1,8-cineol. That's quite an active compound, and that's why we like it in our oils. And then there's the more active, for example, eugenol, right? That's what we mean when we say active, kind of pungent in what it does for us. So we will be more careful with phenols also because they can be not healthy for our skin. So this is what you mean when you say active, right? That it's very pungent, that it actually does a lot for us.
Yeah.
Whereas 1-limonene, I don't know, it's quite nice to use.
Yeah, it's not very. It's oxidation products, yes, but in itself, it has a pretty weak smell, and it's not a super active product. So
this you learn with time and practice, and chemistry helps here also a lot.
But again, if you go into super details, you can probably find an example where a tiny amount of this compound, because of certain special interaction, may have an influence at a very low level. But very generally speaking, if you stop on each of these tiny compounds, at a certain point, it becomes impossible to work, and
yes, of course.
You have to be a bit practical also.
Yes, of course, and this is
and
what
we have to be in the analysis. We cannot reach a point where we will try to analyze all the tiny peaks on the chromatogram. We'll just focus on what, for example, proves that the oil is adulterated.
Yes, Great. So this is very important, and thank you so much for taking the time to do that, because another thing I like to share with Dropsmart is all my contacts, all the people I worked with, and I had the honor and pleasure of working with people like you who are analyze, and people who distill, and people who do research, and people who are hands-on like nurses and like that, and they have a very different point of view, and sometimes they tend to judge each other. Well, why don't we have it to the last compound? So it's great to hear that you will not be able to continue your work if you would analyze every oil to the last compound, and I think people can understand that better now. Of course, if you know that these oils have something that toxic, you're going to take the time to find it.
Yeah.
But this is a great discussion for some other time. Why is then, like lavender, it's easier to identify, and tea tree because it's oils that you worked with a lot. But every time we have this trend of new oils coming up all the time. Those would need a little more time to analyze, to get to know what compounds are there, so you can get more info. Is that, am I understanding that correct?
Yeah, and also, the lab, Phytochemia is a company, so we have to find a way to work so that we are profitable. So if we take 5 hours for each essential oil, economically it's not possible. Yes. So again, we have to find the best compromise between giving the more accurate results in a reasonable time. Because as I told you previously, if you want to know the 10 first compound, it's super fast. Well, of course, it's the same time for the injection, etc. But to analyze, to identify the 10 main compounds of the essential oil is super fast. But we cannot just give 10 compounds. It would, in this case, if you have compounds around 1%, I do not consider it super low. So we obviously have to go further. But at a certain point, again, if we try to identify absolutely everything you see here, it's just not possible in a reasonable time.
Yes, of course. Then you will not also provide the quality, because it needs to be within a certain time frame. So having said that, I'd like to point out that phytochemia is a great analysis. So I guess you found a great compromise and a great point where you can give a quality analysis and still within a time frame that is professional and reasonable for everybody.
And I would mention and repeat, however, that when we have, we still look for specific compounds at a very low level. And I will just show you an example.
Thank you.
This is another, the chromatogram you had previously it comes from a GCFID. This is the GCMS. Mm-hmm. So as you can see, well, we have something which is very similar. We have a separation with some peaks at given retention time. But here in GCMS, when we click on one specific peak, we have the mass spectrum.
The fingerprint.
Okay? Yeah, the fingerprint. And again,
that's
you can
so much
see
fun.
that sometimes we have some partial coalition. We have one compound here. You can see its mass spectrum. And when we click on the other peak, we have another mass spectrum. It's two different compounds.
Great.
So why I wanted to show you this is because even when we, for some essential oil, and for example, especially lavender, we look for some markers of adulteration. And so usually when
you say markers of I can't even pronounce that.
Adulteration?
Yeah, that means these peaks that shouldn't be there. That's what you mean.
Well, an adulteration is when you mix something with an essential oil or another product.
Something that's not
It
supposed to be
can
there.
with something else.
It's
For
just
example,
markers. What would the marker mean?
well, so for example, if you, but I will
I'm
talk
sorry, I'm
about this
so
in
curious.
the next.
Aha, okay.
The
Then that's even better. Folks, come back next time. There is much more interesting info coming up.
what I will just show you is that even if we cannot identify all, because you see, if we
Yes, of
keep
course.
zooming, we keep finding other constituent. We have a molecule here and here and here and here, but at a certain point we have to stop.
Yes.
But still, we still look for specific markers in lavender. For example, here, well, here we have a compound we look for. Maybe it's not easy to see, but
Well, that's why
this
you're the
here
professional.
we have something we look for. So it's tiny, but we look for it because we know that if it's here, it means that the lavender is adulterated.
Wow.
This proves that
so this is a 0.25%.
Well, I don't even know the percentage, and it would be difficult to know the exact amount unless we perform a calibration, etc. Well, it's anyway beyond of the scope, but we have a tiny amount of what we call dihydrolinallyl acetate, and it proves that in this oil, someone added some synthetic linallyl acetate. We know it's the right one because we see some specific points of the fingerprint. This is one compound we look for because it really has some traces of well, the specific structure of the fingerprint of this compound. There's signals in the mass spectrum. At this position, we know that it's a marker of adulteration. So again, we will talk a bit more into how we do, how we compare the information we got with different source of information to check if the oil is fine or not. But at least you show how it works to, well, to play with the GCFID and GCMS and finally get this listing, the list of molecule. The tiny compound I just show you, even it's very at a very low level, we would indicate trace. At a certain point, we cannot even quantify it. But if we have a trace of dihydrolinallyl acetate, in the conclusion, we will write that this is an adulterated product. It's a mixture of synthetic compounds and an essential oil. But we will talk about this in the next video.
Thank you. Thank you. That helps a lot.
So yeah, for the way the GC works, it's that's it. And
so thank you so much. Maybe just to sum it up, because it's so overwhelming. What we wanted to do with this video and this very generous contribution from your side is to first show what is happening in the process. It's actually not even that complex. It's very logical. We put a few drops of essential oil, it heats up, and then depending on their volatility, when it evaporates, it is pushed by helium to a detector. That detector then makes the peaks, right?
Yeah.
And
Well-
then you take those peaks, and if necessary, you use that. Those peaks are the GC. And then if necessary, you use the GCMS or the GC
FID.
FID, and then you can get more information. You look for a certain quantity of these, identifying the chemical constituents that will tell you that it's a certain essential oil that
Well,
you
actually,
make sure-
this will really be the purpose of the next video. I will show, because now we have a listing, and then we have to check if what we got correspond to what we expect.
So that is
this
the next step. Here we came to the step where we get the info, and then the next step is to check if that
we analyze
oil-
info.
Yes. Okay. So this is what we're going to do in the next video.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you so much. It is mind blowing. It really is. It might be for you every day you do this. I don't know how many times, but most of us don't get to see it at all. And if so, maybe a few times. So this is really a treat for us. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So see you in the next video.
See you in the next video.
Bye.
Bye.